Thank you again. We're really honored and lucky and grateful to have you here, John, particularly on such short notice. So next we're going to hear from Dan Poneman, the Deputy Secretary of Energy. Those of you who joined us at our launch event last year may recall that Dan was here as well then. He gave brief remarks and then ran out to the airport, unable to take Q&A, and I promised we would get him back. And true to his word, he is here back again with us today to celebrate our first anniversary event. And I'm really grateful to Dan Poneman for taking time from his demanding schedule to help celebrate the center's first anniversary. Dan has served in the number 2 spot at the Energy Department since 2009, playing a key role in virtually every major energy policy action taken by the administration, both domestic and international. He's represented the administration in our diplomatic engagement with numerous energy hotspots, most recently last month, for example, co-chairing the US-EU Energy Council meeting in Brussels that dealt with European energy security and the Russia-Ukraine crisis. Before serving in the administration, he was at the National Security Council, the Scowcroft Group. I had the very good fortune to work closely with Dan for 4 years on a variety of issues, including just at the tail end, a few weeks coordinating the administration's response to the fuel system disruptions in the New York area that we've already talked about. And Dan will be joining us tomorrow at the roundtable on that I mentioned. Dan is just the best. He's a generous colleague, a deeply respected national security expert, a deeply committed public servant. I'm very lucky to say a friend, and I've really learned a huge amount from Dan Poneman over the years. I'm very grateful to have the chance with all of you, for all of us, to learn more from him this afternoon. So after his remarks, Dan Poneman will be joined on stage by Dan Yergin for another short conversation. Again, if you have any questions, please write them down on cards. We'll pass them to Dan. Please join me in welcoming the U.S. Department of Energy's Deputy Secretary, Dan Poneman.
Well, thank you, Jason, for reading verbatim the introduction I gave you. It really is a pleasure to come back here, and it's great to see so many friends and colleagues. And I'm actually reminded of the very, very early conversations that I had with Jason, which is, do you think there's room for another center of energy? There's so many centers on energy policy. Do you think someplace that's committed to fair and balanced analysis, really can make a place in New York City? And I said, yeah, I think so. And if there's any demonstration needed, I don't think there is actually, because this quickly has become the go-to place for all manner of energy discussion on all of the critical issues that we need. And it's probably not coincidental that one of his first coups was to snag, where'd he go? Our Undersecretary David Sandilow, and who is now working here with Jason, and I see my other former Undersecretary and running partner, Kathy Zoe. It's been an extraordinary run. Jason himself is an extraordinary individual. Not only is he scary smart and a beautiful writer and very articulate, I heard you yesterday morning on NPR, Jason, but if you all remember the movie Zelig, this guy, Jason Bordoff, he is everywhere. And the most telling moment in my recollection of this phenomenon was in the early days of Hurricane Sandy. This was so frustrating not to have 360-degree situational awareness. What's going on up and down the I-95 corridor? What's going on in New York City? What's going on in the boroughs? Which gas stations have gas, no power, no gas, both, neither? And we're trying to figure out what's going on in Queens. And I get a phone call. It's Jason. He says, I'm standing here in Queens. It's open. The SO here is open. So there's no distance that Jason would not go to, no lengths to which he would not go. Look, I've been encouraged by another dear old friend and teacher and mentor, Dan Yergin, whom I've known for almost actually 40 years, which is pretty scary, to be brief, and so I will, so we can have more interesting back and forth. But I'm just going to tee up some observations around 3 plot points. Everybody, I think, has a bucket list. I've always wanted to write a screenplay, and the late Sid Field, who taught many people how to write screenplays, although I don't think he ever actually got one produced, had this description of a plot point where things are going along. It could be dramatic already, but something that spins the plot in a different direction maintains dramatic tension. So I'm going to mention 3 plot points that are of recent vintage and I think worthy of our consideration. Number 1, as recently as, say, yesterday, we had the release of the National Climate Assessment. This is really a profoundly sobering, if not disturbing document. I encourage you all to take a look on the White House website and see how John Holdren described it. But look, since they've been recording temperatures since 1895, depending on how you measure, you could be between 1.3 and 1.9 degrees, the way to the 2 degrees Celsius that we are trying to avoid if we are to head off the potentially catastrophic effects of dramatic climate change. We have witnessed the other critical threshold, 400 parts per million, that has been crossed and stayed above that level for the full month of April. This is truly disturbing. And again, you don't need scientific instruments to measure that which you read every day in the newspaper. To be out in Los Angeles talking to Governor Brown about the incredible drought that they're suffering out there, and to obviously all of us went through the searing experience of Superstorm Sandy. Whether you're in the southeast worried about the hurricanes that are coming, the northeast worried about all of the rising waters in your low-lying areas, it's everywhere, and obviously it's around the globe. And there's no place that's immune from it. And in a way, when you think about the manifest warnings that we've had about this, and I think very eloquently expressed in such reports as the recent report Fatih Birol at the International Energy Agency wrote about some of the dramatic efforts that are still within reach of viability, but need to be undertaken with a genuine sense of urgency. That is, I think, a worthy subject of consideration for smart people like are assembled here at Columbia University. And if I may say, I think that when President Obama chose a suitably sweltering 95-degree day in Georgetown last June to lay out a quite comprehensive set of actions to be taken along 3 very important pillars, all of which are now actively being pursued. And again, we can go more into it in the Q&A, but number 1, we have to continue to do everything we can to mitigate this climate change through such mechanisms as the introduction of more renewable and clean sources of power generation, through the continued work to transform our vehicular fleet to other forms of less carbon emitting energy, through the whole array of energy finance mechanisms that are now and newly getting introduced, and I think a very interesting and exciting area we can talk about more in Q&A. Second pillar, obviously mitigation, all the work we're doing at adaptation. We're involved in climate preparedness task forces from coast to coast that are looking at ways to integrate what we're trying to do on the mitigation pillar in a way that makes sure that if we have, God forbid, another episode in which you have to consider such things as evacuation of large metropolitan areas, that you have microgrids that are supporting our transit systems so that when the lights go out in a bunch of homes, that at least critical functions such as transit systems, such as hospitals, continue to operate. And then finally, the third pillar, international leadership. You know, poor Secretary Moniz is just back from having gone at the president's request to Rome to lead a G7 conversation, energy ministerial. He's going to turn around, go back out to Seoul for a clean energy ministerial, and then again at the president's request, he's going to have to head out to Addis Ababa first week in June, and it's a very important task to deal with the energy issues that he's going to at the first African energy ministerial since, I believe, the late Clinton administration. Second plot point, energy security. You know, this has really come home. We knew that it was coming. I invite you to look at President Obama's speech from Georgetown, I believe it was March 2011. We knew it was important not to rely excessively on a single kind of energy, a single source of energy, a single supplier of energy, and all of the events that we are witnessing in Europe and Ukraine have demonstrated this beyond peradventure. We simply need to get better at this. And I personally was very encouraged. I invite you all to take a look at the G7 Energy Ministerial statement. As multilateral statements go, I think you'll find it extremely content-rich. I think you'll find it extremely operational. And I think you'll find it entirely consistent with the President's Climate Action Plan, his commitment to pursue an all of the above energy strategy, his desire to move from words to action in a robust way, and to take our fate into our own hands, not to use energy supplies as a weapon, not to use energy supplies as a tool of political coercion, but rather for each country to look to its own resources, to look to its own people, to look to its own capabilities, and develop what we have developed, which is as wide a based set of energy options and alternatives as is possible to promote our economic growth, to bring us good jobs, and to lower carbon emissions. Let it be clearly noted that you will not find in the G7 declaration anything that says, well, we can certainly put on hold our concerns about climate change because we've got to get security first. To the contrary, you will find that we can actually work to advance both of those core objectives at the same time. Third plot point, and I will try to be brief so we can get to our Q&A with Dan Yergin, energy finance. And again, the news cycle obliged me a good peg for this portion of the remarks, another plot point, and that is the introduction of the third so-called yield co, mechanism that pulls together a set of assets, renewable power generating assets that are perhaps backed by a set of power purchasing agreements that have long durations that therefore throw off a very predictable cash flow over a sustained period of time. Let me just put this in a little bit of historical context and tell you why it is a plot point. In 2009, there was not a single utility scale solar facility in the United States. And through the Recovery Act and through the loan program that was supported by the Recovery Act, we invested in the first 5, including the largest that we now have so far, Agua Caliente. We invested in large concentrated solar. We now have these plants getting built, generating power, and by the way, the next 10 solar facilities attracted private capital. We helped support one of the largest wind farms in the world at Shepherd's Flat. We've supported biorefineries for cellulosic ethanol. Not to preempt private capital, I asked repeatedly, and again, my colleagues can attest because they were on the credit review board with me. I asked, are credit facilities available for this kind of investment? We're not trying to squeeze out private capital. They said, not at that tenor, not at this time. Remember what credit markets looked like in 2009, 2010. And this was taking cases in which we had surmounted the technological risk, but we had not demonstrated that these facilities could be built out viably at commercial scale. And so now the question becomes, having made that level of investment, can we convert this to a model that is scalable? It is often said by people, I believe, that capital markets move more money in a day than governments move in a year. That's what we need to tap into if we're going to scale to the level of investment that's going to be required to transform our energy economy. And now with these yield cos, you have an important test bed for the concept that you can then create an asset class that perhaps through standardization of contracts can be securitized and then bring more capital at lower prices, allowing more small-scale investors to participate in the greatest energy transformation the world has yet witnessed. And that, if I may say, is a subject worthy of the authorship of Mr. Dan Yergin. So thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Let me first observe for those who can see it, and maybe the camera can zoom in on it, Dan is wearing a great tie. He's wearing the all of the above energy tie, which by coincidence I'm wearing too, and this was not planned. Dan, you sketched out a very compelling script, except that I would argue that it's not a film, it's a multi-year TV series, because it's something that will go on. And I thought what we could do is really take up the plot points that you described and fill them in a little bit. As you mentioned, during this Superstorm Sandy, as well as deploying Jason to Queens to check out the gasoline stations, you were really at the center of trying to figure out what was happening in this fog of war. Tell us what you've been doing and what the agenda is on resilience since then, where we are today and where you want to push it.
Dan, this is one of the most, to be candid, most dramatic and, for me, startling things that I've experienced in my 5 years at the DOE. It was not, frankly, something that we viewed as central to our activities. But, you know, the old line of Shakespeare, some are born great, some achieve greatness, some have greatness thrust upon us. Superstorm Sandy thrust greatness upon us in terms of...
Because really there was nobody who was really responsible up until that point, was there?
Well, I want to distinguish. We had, in the classic bureaucratic sense, stovepipes in our department, otherwise known as cylinders of excellence. And one that we worked on intensively and successfully, if I may say, was our nuclear response mechanism, which everyone here probably had a chance to see in Fukushima. So we had a robust capability over here with all the comms and so forth to support it, and we had a more, frankly, modest capability over in the energy assurance side that was looped into the FEMA mechanism, but it just wasn't robust. And so what happened, frankly, when people understandably turned to the Department of Energy during Sandy to say, what's going on with the pipelines? Why can't we get through that bottleneck? We stepped up, we innovated, we did the first ever drawdown from the Northeast Home Heating Oil Reserve. We got all kinds of waivers to make sure that the fuel could get to the places. We deployed people to all the FEMA regions. But not only did we realize, but it was expected of us post hoc to really build on that. So with the President's support, we're now amping up all of our abilities. We brought somebody over full time to support the Secretary and me in driving this change. We have set up an emergency response council. We now have basically an all-hands approach to this. We met as early as, I think, this morning. And what I think you will find is we're getting more real-time awareness. We're having mobile applications that will allow people, wherever they may be, to find out where the outages are, where the gas stations are on and where they're off. But more than that, we're doing things that will have longer-term ability to be helpful. The Secretary just announced, as I'm sure most of you saw, the gasoline reserve we've had for many years, obviously the Strategic Petroleum Reserve for crude oil supplies, but we now see that may be need in critical areas for refined product as well to ease some of these critical shortages at critical moments. And this will be the first one, and we're going to take a look at other regions and what's required there. So in short, if you went inside the Department of Energy today, you would see, frankly, a hive of activity that now has become one of our core missions and one that has really gained a lot of attention from the Secretary and from the White House as well.
How will this gasoline reserve work?
Well, first of all, we are confining this in the initial instance to the Northeast, where we found in the case of Superstorm Sandy that had we had a reserve that could bypass some of the places where, such as Linden and some of the terminals, we had specific shortages that were creating real bottlenecks, it can be brought to market. And it turns out that when you get that kind of constraint, that you start to get panicked activities at the level of consumer, where even a modest increment in terms of strategic supplies being brought to the market can have a very salutary effect in terms of keeping lines down and keeping people supplied as they need be. So we're going to basically create two of these, one in New England, one in the New York Harbor region. There is existing capacity available there. We will not need to build new capacity. And so we will effectively lease the storage capacity that will allow this to be put in place. There will be rules that are put in place in terms of when the product is reserved for use for the reserve, and then how that product may be released when the need for it has abated.
Earlier this afternoon, David Sandalow and Jim Rogers discussed the issues of cybersecurity and the grid. That obviously falls under the heading of resilience. It's also something that you have been deeply engaged in thinking of. And tell us how the problem looks to you today, and what are the steps or what needs to be done there?
I think it is a serious problem. As you said, this will have to be part of a multi-part series. There is no solution per se. This became a source of keen awareness, I think, to many people when we saw some of the introduction of denial of services attacks and some of the unfortunate episodes that, as we all know, happened to users like Saudi Aramco, where over 30,000 machines were basically made useless. And we have had a deep and continuing conversation with CEOs across the electric sector, and we've set up actually an energy security coordinating committee. We've done a few things. Number one, there are things that we in government know that they don't know, and we have worked with them to provide access. Obviously, we have to be very careful about sources and methods for some of the information, but it's very important that our CEOs understand the nature of the threat. We've done that. There are things that they know that we don't know, and we've opened up that channel as well. So I think a whole set of activities has evolved around situational awareness on cyber, just as it has on fuel resilience. That's the first thing. The second thing is, it's actually surprising the lack of understanding within a number of utilities of the metes and bounds of their own vulnerabilities. So we actually created at the Department of Energy a risk maturity model that was a tool that we piloted with about 17 utilities. Now over 100 have used it to do their own self-analysis to analyze their vulnerabilities. That's the second piece. The third piece is we have a number of cyber tools which we have made available to the utilities. Again, we are very clear that a lot of the capability to come up with these solutions resides not in the halls of government, but out among the utilities. So that's an exchange as well, where they're bringing various tools to our awareness and vice versa. And then the fourth and very important element is we're exercising. We had a very big exercise that was led by the NERC in the summer called Grid X2, which posited both a kinetic attack, a physical attack on the grid, as well as a cyber attack, and had utility executives, senior White House involvement, Department of Homeland Security, because what you know for sure is you don't want the real thing to be the first time you've gone through one of these exercises, and you would be surprised at the things that you don't realize that are disclosed by such an exercise. People who don't know what their legal authorities are, people who don't understand the importance of communicating clearly to the American people early in the crisis, and so forth.
So a lot of lessons and a lot of learning over the last 2 years.
A lot, yeah.
So, in a process that continues.
Yeah, and we have quarterly meetings. This is under the Presidential Directive number 21. We are the responsible agency for the energy sector. And I would tell you that they're basically sellout events. Every time we get the highest possible participation from industry. It's been a very robust conversation. When the president came over to talk about the next hurricane season, and he came over in May 2013, a few months after Sandy, the conversation naturally evolved into a cybersecurity conversation. So these actually turn out to be very tightly coordinated activities.
Dan, there are questions here about, and it's already come up, of course, about nuclear power, premature closing down, administration policy on that. And then also, as we talked earlier, it is about 6 years now that the shale gas, tight oil revolution has been going on in the United States, and how the administration sees this. John Podesta gave us some headlines on it, but would like to hear more of your thinking on both of those.
I know we don't have much time. I'll address both briefly. We are concerned about what we're seeing in terms of shutdown. We're down from 104 to 100 operating reactors. There are a number of factors that are responsible for this shift, and part of it has to do with the structure of our markets. And and Secretary Moniz had brought together his Energy Council to look at exactly what measures could be done to make sure that such things as energy security, energy diversity, capacity that is provided by large-scale baseload nuclear power is brought into the discussion in a way that will allow a long-term sustainable approach to the preservation of our existing nuclear fleet, but also pivoting also to opportunities in such areas as small modular reactors to find new business models that may also spell a promising future in the area of nuclear energy. When it comes to the incredible revolution in hydrocarbons, which no one has written about more eloquently than you, it has been transformational, and it's been surprising how quickly it has welled up in the public consciousness. Again, the National Petroleum Council report that you had a major hand in writing, and I think that the fundamental fact of it is this, that it demonstrates a couple of things, maybe not all of which is obvious. This is not some windfall from Providence. These are the results of heads-up early R&D in these, at the time, abstruse technologies of horizontal drilling and hydraulic fracturing, plus subsequent efforts by the Gas Technology Institute, plus certain tax benefits, plus a lot of elbow grease. And but those early investments that were made by the Department of Energy were very important to the shale gas revolution. Of course, many of those are the same technologies that have brought this prodigious influx of oil to the point where we're at unbelievably 8 million barrels a day of production, heading up to 9.6 according to the Energy Information Administration. People realize this has given us a tremendous opportunity to take this time and the resources that it provides, A, to strengthen our economy, create new jobs, bring back manufacturing, B, when it comes to natural gas, to take that as what has been described by the Secretary as a bridge to the future. It's not the end point, but by converting so much of our power generation to a form of energy that emits only half the greenhouse gas emissions, we are about halfway to achieving our 17% desired reduction by 2020, but we've got a lot more to do. And so the lesson of that, I think, Dan, is we've got to take the opportunity presented by the tremendous economic benefits that flow from this transformation of our hydrocarbon sector and use that to really double down on our efforts in developing clean energy sources, energy efficiency investments, and so forth.
Right. You mentioned the G7 ministerial that the Secretary just returned from, and you touched on the energy security issues on a global basis. How do you see the coordination of the U.S. with the other countries on energy security? What the kind of agenda is like? And it's obviously been highlighted by events, as you pointed out.
I have to say, Dan, as I've been around the world, and a lot of what we do perforce is of an international character because there aren't walls between the countries and so forth. I have found increasingly over time that there is a convergent conversation. I've been to the International Energy Forum and turn to our Chinese colleagues and hear them talk about the kind of clean energy investments they need to make. David Sandler was a great leader of the electric vehicle initiative that we had going with the Chinese. So I think that there is a growing recognition that this is a global problem. I think there's also a growing recognition that by leveraging our common resources, and by that I mean both enlarging the markets into which we can sell, and then making sure that through such things as standardization of appliance standards, standardization of electrical vehicle plug-in standards and so forth, you have an opportunity to drive down marginal cost by increasing the scale of your market that's available. But at the same time, on something that's as challenging but as essential as carbon capture and sequestration, that basically is larger than any single nation can manage. Given how important coal is going to be, ask EIA, ask IEA, for the next several decades, and look at Indonesia, China, India, United States, Europe, we need to pool our efforts. So I don't think there's any question that that third pillar of the Climate Action Plan, which requires international cooperation, is just as important as the first two in getting us where we need to go. And the last thing I would say about that, Dan, is it actually turns out to be, especially since we are in a very favorable position now in our own energy situation, a very strong suit for American leadership, and I think gives us real opportunities to engage with other countries in a way that even just a few years ago I think would have been hard to imagine.
Well, Dan, you described a script with the plot points, and I was processing that. I think that we recognize that you're playing a very important role in writing the energy script that we need for the future, and I invite everybody to thank you very warmly for joining us here. Thank you.